So I'm going to start out with the topic of exploring options for humanities PhDs. And that's going to cover these areas. Since we have a relatively short amount of time for such big topics, I really wanted to focus on these areas in the time that we have today. So the overarching question often that I get from PhDs, postdocs, other graduate students is, how do I find a career that's meaningful, that is actually going to use many of the skills that I have as a PhD? One of the things that we'll focus on in this session is taking a look at exploring and assessing your values. If you've done, how many of you have done career inventories, interest inventories, skills inventories, and values inventories? A few, okay. One of the things that is often the most prevalent are the other two, the skills and the interest. Values inventories are often checklists, and there isn't a lot of exploring of context. So today we're going to do a bit of that. Also, we'll talk about some of the skill sets that are involved in attaining a humanities PhD. And then finally, ways in which you can begin to link those values and skills to career paths that you might take. And then finally, next steps. So what you can do when you leave this conference. So again, these are some of the questions that often graduate students have. And the first two I talked about, well, the first one I talked about, but the second one is a question that comes up a lot. You know, I'm not just focused on one area in my research or in terms of my teaching interest. What do I do when I have these interests that are, in fact, somewhat cross-disciplinary, or they feel like, it feels like I don't fit neatly into one particular job title or one particular category? How do I find my way into something that matches who I am as a scholar, who I am as a person? And finally, how can I know what the value of my PhD is on the open market? Like, in other words, how do employers view the time that I've spent in graduate school? And then how do I know how to market, articulate, how to assess what it's worth? Okay. Which leads us to job offer. So we'll just cut to the chase. I'm going to offer you a hypothetical job at this moment. So I'm going to ask everyone to stand up. Okay. And what I'm going to do is give you a hypothetical job offer. So when I'm going to tell you a few aspects of the job, a few conditions of the job, and then if you'd like, you can ask me a couple questions. When you hear something that's a deal breaker, then you can sit down. If you hear something else that intrigues you, stand up. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to tell you about this job is that one of the preferred qualifications is a degree in modern languages. The second thing is that the job requires good research skills and a person who is detail-oriented and organized. Hey, all right. Everybody's hanging in at this point. Okay. What else? Oh, it does. Uh-oh, did we lose some people? Sorry. Okay, it does require travel, domestic and international. So you have to be willing to do that. Uh-oh, we lost someone. And what else? Oh, also supervision of staff. And any questions, anything else that you would like to know about the job? Yes? Pardon? That's not determined. Sorry. Any other questions? Yes?
How are you employing your language skills sets? Are you working with people live, or are you translation work?
Oh, okay, that's
Language skill set.
Thank you, that's a great question. You're using your language skills directly with the client population. And in this case, I'll just tell you, you are working primarily with students. And a question back there.
What state is this job located in?
It is in California.
Do you know where in California? Like, is it in LA? Is it in Florida?
You're spoiling the best part. I'll have to tell you that at the end. Sorry, yes.
Do you communicate with others on a daily basis?
Pardon?
Do you communicate with others on a daily basis?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. But staff, students, faculty. And another question?
What's the salary range?
This is one of those jobs where, because of the level of the job, it just says salary commensurate with, that kind of thing. In other words, we're not advertising it because we don't want to make anybody mad who's already in a similar job. No. Maybe one more question?
If it is commensurate with experience, how many years of experience is your business hoping for?
It's roughly 3 to 5 years of at least 3 years of relevant experience is the bottom line requirement. And a preference might be for more. Experience in higher education, experience in research, that's another good question. Okay, so we're going to, let's see if there's anything else I can tell you at this point. So we are going to close applications for that job, and I'll ask everyone to sit down. Now I will tell you any guesses first, what the job might be. Yes? Whoa, you're great. Okay. Yeah, it's usually what I do is I'll select a job that's just sort of, like a job, but this is actually a job that is currently open. And I got it from Inside Higher Education. I thought it would be fun to use a job that is, exists right now and is accepting applications. So the job title is Assistant Director, Global Programs at Pepperdine University in Malibu. Okay. How does one take graduate school experience as a PhD, and connect the dots for the employer and translate it so that they see, actually, these are comparable skills, or these are the same skill sets. So yeah, we'll talk about that a bit. This is an example of how values easily come into play when one is considering a potential job, or even if you're just looking through. And how many of you are actually embarking on the job market soon? You're going to file within the year. Okay. How many of you might be like 2 years away from finishing? Okay. And is there anybody who's maybe like first year doctoral students? So a few. Okay, so we have like actually a full range in terms of where people are in their programs. But I do think that because it's necessary to consider every other type of assessment in order to look for a job, people do focus on skills because you have to do that in order to write a resume. You have to talk about interest to some degree for the interview and the cover letter. But the one thing that I found in my 15 years of career counseling practice is that the area where there is the most dissonance, the most mismatch, that causes the most pain and misery for people, particularly if they're midlife career changers, is the area of values. And sometimes it's values related to that job, sometimes it's work-life values balance, sometimes it's a mismatch between, sometimes the job is right, but the organizational values are actually a mismatch. And so because values are abstract, they're intangible, that is the one area that is the most often overlooked, and yet that's the area that has the most centrality to meaning in a person's work and also to a sense of work satisfaction. So that's another reason that I wanted to talk a bit more about that today. When we talk about the skills, and this relates to the notion of whether or not, how does one gauge, what skills are relevant from a graduate education. So this is an interesting finding. The U.S. Council of Graduate Schools actually investigated what employers deem to be valuable in graduate students or students in master's and doctoral programs. And these are the things that are really core in terms of what you bring, in terms of the skills that you develop. Advanced content knowledge, ability to analyze and synthesize data, high-level skills to solve and examine complex problems, and creative intellect to inspire innovation and drive discovery. All of those things are not only core PhD skills, they're also 21st century skills. Those are also the skills that actually drive startups and new initiatives and changes across industry sectors. So these are skills that are valuable, and it's partly how one articulates them. So some of the things that you will want to do is actually do a self-assessment, develop your own story and your career trajectory, your career narrative, and then consider the cultural shift from the academy to industry. And I'm saying industry in the broadest sense, like just meaning other industries outside of academia, whether it's government, whether it's nonprofit sector, whether it's entrepreneurial, and then what skills you have to offer the employer. So those are things that you want to start doing, particularly those of you who are in the final phases of your program. Okay, so values exploration. You have the work values inventory that you completed. I think what we'll do is start with the second exercise and then move to the other one to allow people to complete theirs. So this one, everybody's starting fresh, okay? This is an exercise that you'll complete now. It's called Ideal Day, and it'll take about, a couple minutes to write. This is an essay that you write about a slice of life, about a day in an otherwise ideal, like perfectly ideal life. So you're asked to you're actually asked to imagine that everything in your work and your life is exactly as you want it. And you describe what a day would look like. Everything from what time you get up in the morning, or for some people, their question is, what's the morning? I get up at noon, So the point being that the day is actually guided and informed by your choices and your preferences. And so the key to this exercise, to getting the most value out of it, is to actually be as specific as possible about those things that matter most to you, to be as detailed as possible. to actually create a visual sense of what does that day look like? Who are you interacting with? What kind of work are you doing? Is it different types of work throughout the day, or are you focused on one particular kind of work for most of the day? Do you stop and take breaks at midday? What time do you conclude your day? Is it after midnight? Is it, some people say I go to bed at 9 o'clock. Some start the day, I'd wake up at the crack of dawn and go running on the beach because that's my front yard and I live on the beach because I have it like that, so that kind of thing. So it's everything from where you're living, whom you're interacting with, what does that life look like? What kind of work are you engaged in? So, yes. Well, I mean, let's just say that it's now. But if do you have 5 more years in your program? Okay, so then, yeah, let's say that it's at least 3 years, and you're finished your program. Yeah, thank you. That was an important question. Okay, so let's spend, I don't know, about 5 minutes doing that. Any questions? No? Okay. All right. Okay. How many of you are done with your essay? Okay. So I know we're not all finished, but I think in the interest of time, we probably should stop at this point. And I would like for you to spend just a couple of minutes, find a partner, 1 or 2 people to briefly share your ideal day with them. Just pointing out 1 or 2 of the highlights of that day. And I would like for you, when you hear the person talk about their day, to give a little feedback on what themes or values you see that stand out in their day. So this will be a quick exchange, so 1 minute for each person. So any question? Was that clear? So try to pair up. If you end up with an odd number, just groups of 3. I think we've had some time to discuss the themes that came out of the ideal day, and I'd like to hear just a couple of observations. Yes? Wow, nice. Okay, yes?
What I thought was interesting that we both sort of synthesized from our activities is we didn't emphasize content in our ideal work day,
Oh,
or the structure, the skills, the meetings, and the time.
okay.
We
Oh,
just
wait,
can't-
what did you say about the time part?
Having agency over my schedule.
Got it, okay, all right.
we can't hear you in the back unless you use the mic, so
Oh.
I hate to do this, but I'm going to ask you to use the mic.
Can you, okay. So I was gonna get even louder. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Another one, I think we also did something similar. We're more interested in the structure of it rather than the content. So I wrote down assorted office-y stuff because I don't like bureaucracy all the time, but I do like having the stapler and things for a couple of hours. I'm like, there's 2 hours of paper pushing in there, regardless of what that means. So I think one of the things we looked at was the flexibility. I don't know if that's part of the graduate student's schedule. We want to wake up and kind of do our own thing and then read email and then go to an office. So again, that flexibility of being able to work from home and not have to be in a spot
Okay.
all the time is very important.
All the time, great, thanks. And, actually, I did want to ask Kelly on the time, because I realize it's time for lunch, but should we?
It's not. Why don't we take another 20 minutes or so?
Okay,
whatever you need.
Okay, thanks.
I'm looking into Finley's schedule, and I think he is very impact oriented. Like he's flexible in like the way he works with himself or with others, but the angle is like he needs to have impact on something, on the subject matter, on community or something. So it's very impact oriented.
Thank you. Any other, maybe, like, maybe
we-
one more?
I have a mic. We both talked about a desire for some aspect of self-care that doesn't feel rushed, or in our responsibilities for caring for other people, an ability to do that and feel like we've done a good job at that, instead of having that always be secondary.
Okay, great. Self-care, and would you want to say, would you want to say a little more about that too? Because it's,
My partner had talked about just wanting some time to ground herself spiritually, emotionally, mentally, before going out and doing work. And we're both parents, and so we wanted to know that our children were taken care of in a way that we feel like we aren't able to do right now because we're busy or because we're stressed, etc. So it is about time, but it's also about quality of time.
great, okay, thank you. And then maybe if there's one, maybe we take one more, yes?
Oh,
Or-
I have.
Or two more, okay.
This is something I think we probably all have in common. None of us were on vacation. We were working on our ideal days.
Wow.
And so I think the emphasis on work and how much we really care about the way that work fits into our lives, and the way that we care about our particular work. And for myself, I noticed that I wanted to take advantage of opportunities for growth, and the way in which growth featured into my plans for my ideal day.
Oh, great, okay, thank you.
Something that we had in common was the fact that we both wanted the ability to leave our work behind, which is something very graduate school, I guess. So the idea that you can, at a certain time, you can say stop and then spend time with your family, your beloved, your friends. So.
Right, okay, thanks. So, I think, yeah, I guess that's it. So I really appreciate these insights, because a lot, like, notice the themes that come up. A lot of them have to do with work-life balance. A lot have to do with control over one's flow of work, over the schedule of work. And then I really love the observation that you just made about how, since it's ideal, it could have been, I'm in Bora Bora on vacation, or I'm in the Alps, but that's a very good point, that work is important, and it's a core value for all of us. So I'd like to take a few minutes to go over the next, or actually go back to the first value sheet. And so for those of you who've already completed it, I'd like to ask you to start on what is actually the next step, which is to look at the ways in which those top 5 values come up in that paragraph or that short narrative that you wrote. And then if you could say a bit about how you would want that to be contextualized in a job. So you may have said something about the top 5 values in that paragraph, like that section at the end, but think in terms of, if you're looking for a position, give a couple of brief descriptions of what you're looking for. How would you know that value is embodied in the job? Is that clear, or any questions? Okay, so another way of putting it is that the description at the end asks you to talk about those top 5 values in your story. And so what I'm asking you to do is to sort of choose 1 or 2 that are most, in other words, that would be, if I didn't get these things, it would be a deal breaker. It would be a complete deal breaker, and say a little bit about the context of that. Like, in other words, like somebody might say, you know, I would like to work in an organization where I really feel that there's a sense of collegiality, okay? And so then you might write a paragraph or 2 about what that would look like in action. Like when you say collegiality, does it mean that we have professional development? Does it mean that people, you know, kind of like what sort of signs would you look for? What would you want to be present in a job that you would, you know, that you would consider? Does that sort of help? Yeah. And then for those of you who are just starting it, I would say just spend the next, say, 3 minutes or so outlining that form. So the first part is just making the selections, and then the second part is the summary, and then just get as far as you can on it, because it's sort of a work in progress. It was about a minute, and I'd like to open up some discussion of the work values exercise itself, and just like any comment or feedback or question. Anyone like to? Yes, comment. Oh yeah, I was. Oh.
So maybe this is a question for everybody else in the room, but
Okay.
I was interested in my own, that some of the core values didn't seem as important to me as some of the other ones that had to do with environment. And so, you know, like the day in the life, the ideal day exercise spoke to me a lot, but I'd be interested to hear from other people like how it looked to have those core values be the driving force for what they were.
Okay, that's a good question. Would anyone like to comment? Like, if you had core values that were actually more important to you, or the other way around? Anyone?
I was just thinking as I did this exercise how different my answers are now versus what they would have been 4 years ago. And I think that a lot of times we learn what we don't want when we're you know, in a particular, you learn what you don't like. And that kind of comes before learning what you do like. And I know that that the kind of freedom that you do have as a graduate student to kind of work in the areas that are important to you maybe makes those values seem less important now than they might a little bit later. Just the thought that these things can change over time and that you don't necessarily know what's important to you at the outset.
Thank you so much for saying that, because that's absolutely true, that values are not fixed, that they can, in fact, change based on situation and experience. Any other?
Thank you. I wanted to echo what you just said, because I felt myself selecting values based on what I don't like about my current situation as a PhD candidate. And I wrote, you know, that respect was my top one, because in the publication process, I feel infantilized and I feel as though my contribution is like moot, right? But it would be, I wrote, it would be so great to have a contribution be seen as an integral unit of a component, right? And not just as amusing in a field that's obscure maybe to some. And respect also meaning having a salary that matches what I think my skill set is and represents, which I'm currently not seeing as a graduate student, and I'm having trouble seeing. It feels a little myopic, like, oh, will the money come? I hope so, I don't know. But to me, respect is also salary.
Right, thanks. And that's actually a beautiful example of contextualizing it and elaborating, and why it's so important to go beyond just saying, this is the value, but to actually say, this is what it would look like if this value were in action in my work. Because for you, like you're talking about a twofold thing, like on one hand, work that is central to or important to the organization or within that setting, and then two, the remuneration that reflects that, yes, we value you and we value your work. Any other, yes?
I also was kind of skewed in terms of like the things I labeled as always important being outside of the core values area, but I think what's interesting is when you look at the things in that area that you do consider really important, in conjunction with what you look at in the other areas that are important. And the thing that emerged for me is that when I look at the core values, like for example, I checked independence, which I think is something we all value, but also honesty and respect. And then I also in the work interactions, things like recognition, support, teamwork, and trust. So kind of the thing that emerges for me is this idea that I need to be able to work independently on my own project, but at the same time, I need to be in an organization that has really strong leadership and a really clear vision. And so I think those are the themes that I see starting to emerge. So it's kind of figuring out exactly, like looking not just at the individual values, but how each of the values you consider important relate to the other values you think are important.
Right, that's really key, because it's true, like once you start sorting that out, then you're talking about what you want your work to look like, but also organizational dynamics, and those are the kinds of things that you'll consider when you're, say, doing an informational interview to find out, what is it really like to work here? I've heard that the leadership is great. I heard it's innovative, and then find out more about whether or not that actually aligns with the values that you have. Is there another?
So I want to echo those thoughts first, where I had a bit of a hard time with this activity because I found the values often bundled together, right? When I thought about independence, I also thought about variety and the ways that independence can allow for a kind of variety. So that was a challenge, but I have actually a question to kind of go with that comment, which is, I know that informational interviews are obviously one really valuable way to understand how these values get reflected in different kinds of work environments, but are there any other kinds of clues or key words that we can look for, even just in an initial search or a job description, that might give us a better sense of places that might be friendlier to these kinds of really overlapping core values that I think I'm hearing a lot of us express?
Oh, okay. Well, could you say again, like name a couple of the core of the values that are most important to you?
Sure. I think for me, independence, learning, variety, and influence were my big four. The fifth one I kept changing my mind on, so.
Okay, great. So actually that fits into the next segment, and so I really want to, as we're going through that, relate it back to what you're asking about, because they're good examples of how you can look for indicators. And then do we have one more, or should we? Okay. So, no, okay. Okay, so in this process of looking at possible career paths, possible other types of industries, types of organizations to work in apart from traditional academia, very often I have doctoral students and PhDs come in and they'll say, I'm very good at transcribing arcane ancient texts, but that's really the only skill that I have. And then as we start to look more closely, they see that they actually have far more valuable and relevant skills than that. And also, as they're exploring what's out there and what employers might potentially hire them and, the variety of roles that there are to play, I couldn't resist an analogy. If this looks a little familiar to you, or if you read Harry Potter or know about Platform 9 3/4, that's not really visible to mortals, but it opens you up to an entire new world. And so that's kind of like a metaphor for what happens once when someone starts to explore that. Okay. So one of the things I want to start with is just a few trends. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are some that are, I think, useful to know. So this information is from The Ladders, which is an online job matching service, and they actually conducted a recent study of fast-growing job areas. And so these are some of the things that they found. Among the top 10% of growing jobs, less than 2% of them had titles using the word manager or director. And so there's a trend there that says that you can be a professional with good remuneration, with good salary, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a sort of a notion out there that I think that still exists, that the only way to move up in salary is to move out of your professional realm and into a managerial realm where you're supervising people who do the work that you love to do. But that's not always the case. Some of the fastest growing jobs that they've identified, and again, this is just a snapshot. It's anecdotal. It's not a complete list of all the fast growing jobs, but the ones that they specialize in: user experience design, iOS, and business intelligence. And what's interesting here is that these are newly created jobs. Some of them didn't exist before 2007. This is another, sorry. A couple of other trends. I don't know what happened to that slide, but one is that there's an increasing emphasis on the importance of narrative, the importance of story that goes beyond the realm of the humanities. And we see this in business and industry. Organizations want to capture a story in order to create a brand, in order to convey organizational values, in order sometimes to establish a story about that company or about that organization. So organizational storytelling has been it was an emerging trend some years ago, but now it's more common in the workplace and particularly in private industry in a way that it hadn't existed before. 3M Company uses organizational narratives, the World Bank, IBM, and Xerox. So you have companies that were viewed largely as not only major Fortune 500, well, viewed it, that's what they are. Not only are they major companies, but they're also in the tech sector. And it's so interesting that they're looking at story and narrative to convey what they're about or what message they want people to get when they think about that organization. The other thing about narrative that's compelling is that it's memorable. It's in the words of Chip Heath. It's a sticky note. It's a story that sticks in the memory, because often the stories have an emotional component. Okay. So those are some of the trends to keep in mind as you look at potential paths. A couple of examples of humanists at work, and I use these just to illustrate ways in which people can use their background as humanists to go into a field that is sometimes unrelated on the surface, but actually has a strong connection in terms of the process. John Dahl is vice president of technology at Bright Cove, and he actually formed another startup earlier called Zencoder. So his background is that he is a philosophy, he has a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Wheaton College and an advanced degree in another area of the humanities. So he notes that in terms of thought processes, philosophy and coding kind of use the same sorts of patterns. They take big problems that are too huge to think about in total and break them into finer pieces. They also fundamentally involve thinking in an abstract fashion. So again, he's saying these are the ways in which they're similar, even though on the surface they don't really look the same. And so I encourage you to do so as you explore potential career opportunities. So one way of thinking of it is, what kinds of problems do you like to solve? You know, what kinds of challenges? What kinds of problem solving appeals to you, or is most gratifying to you? Another example, Joan Shekel is called the director's guru. She has a background in theater and literature, and she loved books, she loved theater, and she started out with this grassroots sort of a job working with actors on the storyline of their characters, and then it actually grew into something that's called a lab that's in Hollywood. And from her films, from her lab, I think they just call it the lab, but her workshops basically, there's 76 films that came out of the work that she has done with people around, you know, not only directors and producers, but actors and writers as well. So 76 films came out of her workshops. 74 of them were released. And so they've gotten over 600 nominations, including Academy Awards, over 300 awards. And not that we're counting, not that it matters, but collectively earned $1.2 billion. Okay, so how's that for the humanities at work? Two very different examples, but the key here, and I think what's most important, is that these are people who were able to take some of the skills, the strengths, the perspectives that one has from being a humanist and to apply them to other areas. And you may not necessarily be interested in something that is as far afield as those two, but I just use those examples to illustrate that sometimes when something at first glance doesn't seem connected, often there may be a way in which it's connected to PhD humanities skills. Okay, so speaking of which, these are 4 areas of the skill sets. And again, as I mentioned, it's not a complete list. It's not an exhaustive list, but I'm actually using these areas because these are the skills that many PhDs in the humanities not only have, but also prefer to use in their jobs. So the research analytical, communications, instruction, and then organizational. And of course, we could generate a much longer list than that, but these are examples to work with for now. That's what happened to that slide. Okay. So going back to storytelling, here's an example of how one might go about exploring jobs that are out there. So how many of you use Indeed for job search? Okay, good. So a fair number of you. Indeed.com is a great site for finding positions, for finding organizations. And this is just a trimmed down version of the screenshot, but if you actually go to the website, you'll see on the left-hand side a list of job titles. On the second half of that page, on the left-hand side, it'll say companies, and really it's organizations, not always companies, but organization list. And so it'll give you a number in parentheses, and it might say, like if you had, say, Pearson as a company, in parentheses it might say 87, meaning that there are 87 jobs at Pearson right now that use the term storytelling, that have something where the role has something to do with storytelling. So not only is this keyword search a great way to find positions, it's also a great way to look for organizations that you then might want to, flag and say, I'll come back to that. There's nothing here right now that really speaks to me, but this is a kind of organization where people who have my skill set tend to hang out. They tend to hire people like this. So I'll go back to this. And so it's a way for you to generate a list of potential places to work. So there are 3 arrows here. And so what I did was to flag these 3 because I think it's interesting to see how storytelling plays out in each of these jobs. The first one, it's actually Public Health Institute in Oakland. It's actually a research organization. And so they're looking for someone who's a communication strategist, but they want you to use storytelling to influence advocacy and policy change. So in other words, it's another example of using storytelling to communicate the values, the initiatives, the direction of that organization as they want to impact public health policy. Okay, so that's one way of using one's communication skills. The other one, it's a different job title, Decision Science Director. It's not a title that you see a lot, but if you like the Northwest, it's up in Oregon with Nike. And so they want someone with a history of excellence and innovation in synthesizing complex findings, data visualization and storytelling, client presentation and partnership. So it's a different feel in terms of what's being asked for. But again, storytelling is the link. And then the third one at the bottom, research associate, an interest in data-driven visual storytelling. And that's Business Insider, okay? So you have one that's more of a communications strategist, director, another one that is, it actually has more to do with synthesizing the findings, making meaning of the findings, and then the last one is actually more of a researcher, okay? So that's an example of how you can start looking. Now, what about places to look in terms of, types of industries or types of organizations? And I selected this one because this is a great example of how you don't necessarily want to rule out a place because the mission of the agency is outside of your field. Okay, so this is NSF. Who would think that NSF would hire a historian, right? And further, did you see the salary? So the starting salary is $6,000. And this is a good example of how, if you're interested in the federal sector, it's a good idea to use multiple ways of researching the organizations, researching the agencies. There is a great resource it's a program. It's called Pathways Program. So it's a relatively new program by the federal government, and it's designed to get recent college graduates and students into the labor force at the federal government. So there's even a directory of majors and jobs that correspond to those academic disciplines. So it's a great way of looking to see, okay, so I'm in English literature, these are some of the jobs that are available with my background. And then there are also internships, not only for undergrads, but for graduate students as well. And then, let's see, what's the other? Okay, that was it. Okay, now this is back to address the question about looking for organizational values or looking at like work values, lifestyle. This tells you something about what's being asked for. And so you notice that there are different ways of qualifying for the job. So if you have a master's degree and more than 8 years of experience and managerial experience versus a PhD and 6 or more. And so that's broadly framed the entrepreneurial experience, because that could be grant writing. It could be doing a lot of the work that you do as a graduate student. Benefits. Here's the part that connects with work-life balance, okay? So this is an indicator. When you're looking at a lot of these benefits, it's really clear that this is an organization that looks family-friendly. Telecommuting, flexible work hours. So they're trying to say, we're trying to attract people who have very specific skill sets, and we're willing to accommodate you to make it work for you. Child care subsidy, child development center on site, you know. So again, they're really making it obvious that we're an employer that's not afraid to hire people with young children, to hire people with families, to consider other ways of working apart from the traditional 9-to-5 office. Health services unit on site, which is really interesting. And a gym, physical fitness facility on site. So if you look at most of the benefits, it's so interesting that they have to do with work-life balance rather than just the traditional, 403, 401k, like the standard thing. So they're saying we're trying to attract PhDs, and we want to make it easier for you to say yes to work here.